Hello, this is Scott Hoy.
And I'm Kyle Miller. Today's episode of the Psychology Talk podcast is from the vaults. We've handpicked some of our favorite and most popular episodes to share with more listeners.
Since we started this podcast, we've been on a mission to better inform clinicians and consumers on topics in mental health. We strive to reduce myths and misconceptions and enlighten you beyond the many memes or sound bites that try to sell you on ways to better your life.
So without further ado, here's an episode from the archives to do just that. So please do your part and take a moment to subscribe, like, and leave a review for us at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or wherever you're listening in from. That would help us to continue our mission at the Psychology Talk podcast.
Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoy, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode.
Welcome. This is Kyle Miller, and on today's episode, I will be talking to Hersch Wilson, who is the author of Firefighter Zen. Hersch is a firefighter and a writer, and he is also the author of a book called Play to Win. But today we're going to talk about Firefighter Zen. I'm really excited to talk to you, Hersch. How are you?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to come on. So first of all, I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about before we jump into the book, I'd like to let our audience know a little bit about you. Are you still living in New Mexico?
Still in Santa Fe. We've been here since 1986.
Okay, yeah. Great.
Yeah.
And you've been a firefighter for over 30 years?
Yeah, this is my 33rd year anniversary.
That is amazing.
Coming up this fall. Yeah. It's been an education. It has been a revelation, and it has absolutely changed how we approach life. Both my wife and I were firefighters, and it really changed how we think about things.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I read the book. I got to tell you, I think it's great. I think there's a lot of really good nuggets of wisdom in there. There's so much. I mean, we could probably talk for hours just, going through the book part by part.
Right.
But I'm sure there are some particular pieces that I would love to hear about. And just, for our further information, what else do you do? Since you're a volunteer, are you still working in other areas?
Yeah, so I have career ADD. I started out, I went to college, I quit college, I was in theater and dance for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And then I left that and I became a commercial pilot. I flew for about another 5 or 6 years. Then my family, we moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico from Minneapolis and started a family business called Pecos River Learning Centers, which was about bringing experiential learning and team building and culture work to large corporations.
Okay.
And I did that for about another 10 years. And during that time, I was always writing. And I joined the fire department in 1987, I think.
Okay.
And it continued on that. So that's been one of my longest careers.
Okay.
Is being a firefighter.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You said before we got on, you said the 34th year. That's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
That's so great. Okay. So tell us a little bit. How did this book come to be, Firefighter Zen?
Yeah. The book came about after about 25 years of being a firefighter and realizing that it had been such a revelation to me in terms of how we view life, and how our approach to everything in our life had changed based on being a firefighter. And it wasn't just in the firefighter world, but how it affected our view of life and death, how it affected our view of love, how it affected our view of our family. So that was such a profound change that one day my wife, Lori, who's also a firefighter, said, "You need to write a book about this." And then it was a matter of kind of, and not wanting to just tell gory stories, but really to kind of distill down what the kind of key lessons were that would apply to everybody, especially what we're going through now. It seems highly applicable to the, I call this time the great unsettling, and what I think, and Firefighter Zen has a lot to do with helping us through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I was reading through it, you do share some really intense and emotional stories, and ones that really, it helped me to further understand. Now I work with first responders in my therapy practice.
Right. And
this actually gave me an even deeper understanding of, because a lot of firefighters or police or even EMTs sometimes, even in therapy, don't really care to share the story because they feel like they're reliving it. And so sometimes it's, it just takes a while for people to loosen up. And so being able to read in your book, you really went in depth with the stories that you shared and the ones that really impacted you. And so do you feel like this is a culmination of your time as a firefighter?
I hate the word culmination because that makes it sound like I'm quitting.
Yeah.
But, so it's more of a snapshot of the first 3 decades.
Okay, there you go. That's a better word. Yeah. Because you're not leaving.
I'm not. No.
You're still doing it.
Right.
That's great.
Right.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit? I noticed the book is broken up into parts. So you've got part 1 is the firefighter universe.
Sure.
Part 2 is keep calm and carry on. Part 3 is when dragons come. And part 4 is the grief road. And part 5 is be brave, be kind, fight fires. And it feels like the way that this was designed and the structure that was built in it feels intentional. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I think as a premise, and I often get reminded that I can be pretty dark. And as a basic premise, and this is kind of where the Zen portion of it comes, is the firefighter universe is realizing what the universe actually is and what life actually is. And whether you come at this as, I think of Zen and I think of firefighter as both discoveries of life, and you come to the same conclusions. And the conclusions are that life is short, that as a firefighter we say that stuff happens, and that you can have a life plan, you can have your calendar filled out, just like we all did in March. And then something happens and all of a sudden your calendar is erased for the rest of the year, right? And that becomes what the firefighter universe is. And so it is life is short, life is uncertain, stuff turns on that dime, and I don't think of that as dark. I think of that as realistic, right? And once you get grounded in that, once you accept that as a premise, then we can begin to find what true joy is. Because I think we get happiness and joy confused all the time for me, so definitionally. So happiness might be I get a new car, that car I've always wanted. right? Or I get a job, the job I've always wanted. But those are all relatively superficial. I mean, we have to work, we have to support ourselves. But true joy is a much deeper thing. Mm-hmm. It really comes from, I think, two things: from having deep and loving and abiding relationships, right? Being in love and being loved, and secondly, doing work that is purposeful, doing work that makes a difference. I read just last week that someone said to their mantra to their kids was "do well and do good," right? And I think that comes from that first initial understanding of how the universe actually works.
Yeah, it sounds powerful. And so what I feel like I'm hearing you say is that we need to accept reality in order to find the joy.
Right. And I think the problem is society teaches us, if you listen to the culture, society teaches us a whole different set of values. That we shouldn't suffer, that it's about money, it's about status, and I don't want to diminish any of those things, but ultimately that is not what makes us joyful. That is not what gives us a meaningful life. And I think really kind of departing from the cultural norms and understanding what life is really about is an important first step to then moving on towards what we all want, which is, at least I think, my bias is that we want joy and meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think that you really, I remember reading that in the book, and it really stood out to me. You even defined your difference between joy and happiness. And I think our society does, it tells us that happiness is the end goal. But what you're saying is that we're working towards joy, and happiness is an outcome of being useful and doing good work and being a good person. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the King Midas story. Mm-hmm. Right? It's the King Midas story that at the end of the story, he's got all the gold he wants, but he turns his own daughter into gold.
Yeah.
And then she's inaccessible. Right.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Okay. And so the keep calm and carry on. I think that was the first section or the first part that really started to delve into. I think you had the field notes
right
at the end of each section. Yeah, that felt like that was the part where I was like, oh my gosh, there's some. I think it's actually REBT, the ABC model came in.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I wonder if this guy went to therapy. You know?
Yeah.
And then later on in the book, I noticed that you said that a trauma therapist once said something to you. I don't remember the quote, but yeah, so that really started to catch my attention, and that's when I really got hooked in the book, and I was really starting to think, this is not. I went into it thinking that it was for firefighters, and it was like a field guide for firefighters, but I think it's really a field guide for anyone, and and I think that the messages that are in here, there are some really, really great nuggets that help kind of guide us, especially with, it really hit me when you were talking about how you had to go through a rite of passage in order to really, I'm interpreting it as like feel grounded in your work and understand being present.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So can you talk more about that?
Sure. I think my rite of passage just had to do with my first call where somebody actually died under my care. And it was shocking. And before that, and I think this goes to how we live our lives. Before that, I thought I understood life. I thought I understood being a firefighter. I thought basically things were benign, like an 18-year-old, because I think sometimes you all have that 18-year-old brain that you think you're immortal and immune, and then something happens, right? Mm-hmm. Something happens that's a tragedy. Something happens that is difficult to deal with, and we are forced to re-examine who we are and what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's what a rite of passage is. And so that was my rite of passage. And I think that's an experience, hopefully, most of us go through so that we can get in better touch with kind of the elemental necessities of life. Mm-hmm. Because my fear is, and part of the problem with civilization and the comforts of civilization is it takes us away from those kind of elemental necessities, the actual drumbeat of life. I assume that some people go through their whole life never having gone through rite of passage until they actually are at their deathbed. But without that rite of passage, without that kind of getting in touch with what's really going on, we're lost. Mm-hmm. We're lost. So we aren't grounded.
Yeah.
So.
And you talked about how before you had that rite of passage, there was a lot of fear around that firefighting work and
Absolutely.
And the medical part of it and, the possibility of running into those. So it sounds like your rite of passage was you learned that this is something, while it's hard, that it is something that you can make it through and and help.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that goes to what fear is, and I think we all have things that we're afraid of, mm-hmm. right? And they can be small things, or they can be the existential things. They can be fear of death, mm-hmm. fear of losing a loved one. I was talking to my daughter last week, and she is an ICU doc at University of New Mexico Hospital, and she just had a baby, and we were talking about all the risks that we're going through right now, and how that life feels so much more risky. Yeah. And people, and she's dealing with COVID patients on a regular basis, and how you have to kind of have to understand that life is risk, mm-hmm. right? And we never get out of that equation. And I think Helen Keller once said that security is a myth. There's no such thing as safety. Mm. And I think understanding that and getting grounded in that fact, accepting that fact and moving on is an important part of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And what I write about in the book.
Absolutely. And so that feels like it takes into the part when you talk about when the dragons come. I think it's a great metaphor, and the dragons being not only the fire,
right,
but the big things. And I'm not sure if it came up in part 2 or part 3, but you alluded to it just a second ago when you were talking about it's the 3. Is this a problem, an inconvenience, or is it an emergency? Is that the
right.
third? Yeah.
Yeah.
So those really, I think that's a really great grounding technique. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and where did that come from for you?
Absolutely. So it comes from my dad.
Okay.
And it's one of those things my dad said to me, and I said, yeah. And then I became a firefighter, and I go, oh, yeah, he was really right. But I never told him that. I never told him he was right.
He's not going to get the satisfaction.
He's not going to get the satisfaction. So it comes from this. And I think part of it is that in our day-to-day lives, not faced with true crisis and true emergencies, our brains work in a way that we will make emergencies out of things that are not emergencies. Mm-hmm. And my great example is, the example I use a lot, is we're stuck in traffic. We're going to be late for a meeting, right? And we immediately go into overdrive. Oh, my God. and we might not be thinking this consciously, but subconsciously thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be late for the meeting. If I'm late for the meeting, my boss is going to look down upon me. If he looks down upon me, I might not get that next promotion. Oh my God, I might get fired. If I get fired, I'm going to end up on the streets. My wife's going to divorce me. My husband's going to divorce me. I'm going to end up homeless, right?
Yeah.
So with that narrative going in the background, we get really upset. We catastrophize, right? And we don't have and I talk a lot about mental discipline. We don't have the mental discipline to say, is this a true catastrophe, or is this simply an inconvenience? And I think one of the most powerful words in our language is inconvenience, right? 99% of the things we encounter every day are inconveniences. Now, I think the pandemic has really taught us that all the stuff we thought was important that I have to do came to a grinding halt when the pandemic hit. And a lot of us were saying, okay, here's what's really important. Here's what's not important, right? All this other stuff that I was worried about is really inconvenience. It's not a tragedy. It's not an emergency. Don't really need it. Here are the things that are really important. Yeah. So the mantra, this is just an inconvenience, not a tragedy, is a really important mantra to kind of learn and then practice and practice and practice. Because if you can go through your day saying, oh, that's inconvenient, that's just an inconvenience, that's just an inconvenience, a couple of things happen. We can stay calmer, right? And if we can stay calmer, we're much better problem solvers. And we actually can use our energy and our intellect to help solve problems rather than kind of ring a fire alarm.
Right. Yeah. And I think that something that really also resonated with me was when you described how having to experience those actual catastrophes helped solidify what is a problem or an inconvenience, right? You get if people are in danger of dying, that's a catastrophe, right?
Right.
But you're right. If you haven't experienced a lot of turmoil or a catastrophe, things can feel much bigger, right?
Sure.
And I can tell that you've learned a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy because there's a lot of that, taking the step back and kind of walking through the process. And using your thoughts to help your behavior, right? Yeah.
Right. And I think in the firefighter world, the reality in firefighting is that 95% of our calls that we go on are not emergencies, right? There's not a house burning down. There's not a life threat. And so we quickly learn the mindset that there's a difference between, even though the 911 call goes out, there's a difference between a true emergency and most of the calls we go on, which are inconveniences. Now, the deal is the people who are calling 911 might think of them as emergencies, right? But in the view of the firefighter, they're not, right? They're kind of stuff that happens all the time, day after day, and we can solve the problem and move on.
Yeah, and that shows the difference between the person who's calling 911 because I think you mentioned in there they said that they called and said they thought they were having a heart attack when they had acid reflux, right? But to that person, if they've never had that experience before, you don't know the difference. But and so it feels like the power in what you're talking about is. And there was so much power when you talked about the analogy of standing in the circle and being the hula hoop, I think you said was part of the training. Right. And so, can you talk more about the
love to. So when you go to officer school, one of the things they teach you is that they'll run a scenario, like an emergency scenario, and they give you a hula hoop. And your job is to stand inside that hula hoop, and no matter who's screaming at you, no matter what you see, your job is to stand inside that hula hoop and not get sucked into the first person who's in pain, right? And we do that. The reason we do that is nothing will cause chaos more than if there's no command presence, if there's no mind seeing the whole thing, right? Taking a step back, asking the question, what's really going on here? What are the real emergent needs versus stuff that we can wait for? Yeah. And I think the analogy to real life is when something happens, we can get quickly sucked into going into action. We run to the hospital and we forget to take our car, or lock our house, right? And it's that ability to take a few seconds, a few minutes, and in a real emergency scene when you're in a truck and you're in command, you roll up the window so you can't hear anything, right? People screaming at you, and just take those first few minutes to kind of think about what's really happening, what's really going on, what are the priorities here?
Yeah. And when I think about that, I imagine it in my mind. There's all of this chaos going on, or perceived chaos, right? And I mean, in some of the stories that you talked about, it was legitimate chaos going on.
Yep. Absolutely.
And you're telling someone, and I know that in the book you talk about going slow to go fast, which is really a great concept. But I imagine, like, for most people, that automatic response is to just jump in and start doing things.
Yep.
And we know from experience that sometimes when you do that, you actually do the wrong thing.
Yep.
Right? Or sometimes you hurt more than you help because you're jumping in so quickly. Yep. And so, to hear that there is this system set up. I read the part where I think it might have been you who was tending to someone who was really critically injured. And you mentioned the person who was the command at the moment. And you said, this guy, I need help. And he's like, I can't help you. I'll send the next person who comes in.
Right.
And right away I was like, oh my gosh, like you're saying, no, I can't help you.
Right.
But then right after that, you explain why that happens. There's so much power in being able to take the step back and survey the situation, get all the details up front. And it doesn't take as long as we think it does, but our emotions tell us that we need to jump.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
And so, as I was reading through the book, I was like, man, you really are learning some amazing, if you can take it away. Right. And so I would like to get to the grief road, because I think that's another part that really resonated with me.
Sure.
But I'm also interested because I have worked with some first responders that have become more callous and turned off. And they really struggle in personal relationships because they had a hard time learning the lessons that you've laid out in the book. They did become kind of hardened to the work, and I don't blame anyone for that.
Sure.
And yet it really impacts your ability to be relational and to really have a joyful life.
Yep, absolutely.
So I would just love to hear, what you have to say about that.
Right. I think two things. I mean, I was incredibly fortunate to be on a fire department that from the beginning was open and supportive, and we talked about these kinds of calls.
Okay.
I have a hugely supportive family structure, because Lori my wife was also a firefighter, so we could talk about these things. And I think a lot of it goes to kind of the archetypes that we carry in society especially about men, that we're supposed to suck it up, right? Yeah. That we're supposed to not talk about stuff. And although that's eroding, it's still very prevalent in the fire department. There was a survey done by the the National Union of Firefighters, and they interviewed 70,000 firefighters, and I think 70% of them said that PTSD was not a real thing, right?
Wow.
And so we still have a lot of denial in the fire service. But I think more importantly is the problem is that I think we often think and use the word callous, and it's like the idea that when you have a wound, a callus builds over it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a more appropriate analogy is that those calluses are ripped off as you become a firefighter, and you are so much more vulnerable to what you see every day, right? And it is scary, it is painful, and it's how we deal with that pain. It's and we're not a very busy fire department. We've had our horrible calls, but I think of the police, and I think of the kind of city paramedics who see things that are just horrific, that are life-changing, and we're not taught how to deal with that, right? How to deal with that? What is the best practices for dealing with it? And instead, we're taught, don't deal with it. Just suck it up.
Right.
Now, I think in the same way, as we grow up in society, we're not taught how to grieve, right? We're not taught that there are going to be losses. That we're not taught that life is suffering. We're taught something entirely else. So when something bad happens, when we lose a parent, when we lose a sibling or lose a best friend, we're at a loss. We don't know, right? So we kind of make up what grief is supposed to be like. We kind of make up how we're supposed to feel, right? And it often doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And, and I think the thing that I've learned is that everybody has their own way of dealing with grief.
Yes.
Right. It is. There's not one way. I mean, Kubler-Ross's stages of grief were, that's a starting point. But I think people jump around.
Absolutely.
And I think we have to say to people, it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay. The way you feel is the way you feel, right? And I will support you in that, rather than say no. I mean, when my little sister died of leukemia, when I was 6, she was 3. And the day after the funeral, my grandmother came in and cleaned the room, took all of Katie's stuff out, right, removed it all, because she her idea of Catholic grief was that it's over in a couple of days, suck it up, right? And I think what we have to have just allow ourselves to understand that grief is different for everyone, and that there is no one path, right? Yeah. But I think the other thing, and I write about this in the book, we had a really bad call, and one of the paramedics, we'd had a debriefing after the next day, and one of the paramedics said, the next few months are going to suck. Mm-hmm. And I think that means two things. It's hard, right? It's painful. And just in terms of what happens day to day, you don't sleep, you have recurrent thoughts, you're recursively going through the death, but it's also not forever, right? It's not forever. The body and the mind heal. If we allow the processes to work out naturally, we heal. We don't go back to being the same, right? Right. We're never going to be the same, but we will heal. And I think that's the message that I've learned about going through really bad calls and grieving.
Yeah. And I think one of the key aspects, it sounds like, is also, you mentioned, I'm not sure where it is in the book, but you talked about finding your tribe. Like it was I think that was belong in chapter 26, the belong piece. Yeah. I think it is so important for the people, if the people around you are supportive, it's much easier to go through that grieving process.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? If you have that, so you did go, I think it was, you mentioned the first death, and you got called to talk to your chief. You went and had breakfast, right?
Right.
That interaction to me sounded like a more traditionally masculine conversation, right? Like it's that tough love, get over it, don't think about it, we got to move on, right?
Right, exactly.
Where I completely understand where that's coming from,
right?
But I don't think that allows us to grieve.
Right.
That doesn't allow, like you said, we need to be allowed to have those emotions. We need to be allowed to open up, and I think that you are right. And if we've got 70% of firefighters saying that PTSD doesn't exist, you've got 70% of the people that believe that they have to live up to this, and not just men, but the first responders. You have to be. A lot of people believe you have to be vacant of emotion. You have to be able to just shut it off, right?
Right, exactly.
And I think you even said it in the book that we can't do that.
Right.
We have to get in touch with it, and we have to learn about it and work through it, not try and shove it aside.
Absolutely. I think it's just, I think there's a sense that I'm afraid to be sad. I'm afraid to be in pain, right? I deny all those things. When in fact, I think the human experience and what Buddha taught was that life is suffering.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's accepting and incorporating suffering into our lives instead of trying to push it away. Mm-hmm. And I think the result is when you do that, you have a much deeper understanding of why we're here and how we need each other.
Yeah.
And what the ultimate reasons are for being here.
Mm-hmm. And another thing was that you talked about was kind of going back to, why do I do this work? What is your purpose? What's the why?
What's the why?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how you phrased it, but that's basically what it was.
Yeah.
Is you have to go back to, why am I doing this? How am I being of service to others? Things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wondered, because I'm in a south suburb of Chicago, and I work with some Chicago first responders, and as you said, in a metropolitan area, you're going to have a different experience, and you're going to have. So I wonder if you also have like a very varied experiences in your life. Like you said, you have your vocational ADD,
right?
I'm wonder, and it sounds, you're it sounds like you're somewhat academic. In general, you're a lifelong learner, right? You're really open to things, and I'm really interested in how to open this space for people who are working as first responders in these really challenging environments, and they feel like they have to live up to that, that standard.
Sure.
Have you had experiences with other first responders where they've been able to kind of shift their perspective?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, I have a lot of my friends in the department come from. Have come from other fire departments, urban departments. They retired Santa Fe. They become a volunteer, and it's very interesting. I mean, where it's kind of a wrong way to say this, but stuff catches up to us. And so, one of my best friends on our fire department was very stoic, very suck it up, right, and. 5 years later, after we had a really bad call, a number of kids were killed. And 5 years later, we were coming home from another call, and it was like 11 o'clock at night. We were standing in the station. It was dark except for the bright, lights of the station. And he turned to me and said, those kids look so peaceful. I thought they were sleeping, right? And this is 5 years later, and my takeaway from that was that you can't repress this stuff. right? It's there in our consciousness. We're recursively thinking about it, and it'll come out eventually. It'll come out, and it can come out in incredibly harmful ways. The suicide rate amongst firefighters is really high. The depression and PTSD and divorce and alcoholism, those are all things that we deal with. And I think a lot of it has to do with that we repress the stuff. We don't talk about this stuff. We often don't have communities that are accepting of talking about this stuff. And we have this image of what it means, especially for men, this image of what it means to be a male firefighter or a man, right? Yeah. We just can't show weakness.
Right.
All right. And I think once you've gone through this kind of the transformation of accepting grief and accepting pain, I think not only are you a better EMT, more empathic, and more compassionate, but I think your survival rate is, your ability to get through this career. You have a higher probability of doing that with some health.
Yeah. That's really it hits me, and I think about for some of the firefighters that I've been working with, they don't feel like they're able to grieve.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no time for that. You need to move on.
Absolutely.
Right? Which, again, I completely understand it, and it's valid.
Yeah. Right.
And yet, I think you're hitting on that time does catch up with you, right?
Absolutely.
Eventually, it's going to come up, right? You can only push it aside for so long. And I do believe there's research out there about the end of career when first responders retire. Some of them really struggle, and some of them become completely different person because the weight is lifted off. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think part of it is, and I guess it's analogous to now, is that when you're a firefighter, you're always waiting for the page to go off. So you live in a highly alert state all the time. Mm-hmm. And for career firefighters, when you're on shift, for volunteer firefighters, 24/7. And I think that takes a toll. I think that takes a toll unless you deal with it.
Absolutely. So I'd love to, just talk about part 5, that be brave, be kind, and fight fires. There is, I think this feels like it's where it kind of brings it all together and wraps it all up. So, what would you like the reader to get out of that section, or that part? Sorry.
Sure. I think when you come down to it, when we come down to essentially what do we need to do differently to really find ourselves and find joy, right? And I think there are 3 or 4 things. One is be brave. Mm-hmm. So much of our lives, because we are informed by fears, and they're social fears. So it's not a risk of dying or being killed or being hurt, but so social fears. It's the fear of being rejected. It's the fear of losing. It's the fear of being emotionally uncomfortable. All those things infect us every day and stop us from being who we want to be, right? So what I talk about in the book is that sometimes in any kind of interaction, any kind of day, the most essential question we can ask ourselves is, what is the brave choice? What is the bravest thing I can do? And if you go back to when you were a teenager, which to me, like we're all essentially still teenagers, right? And all our society's based on the kind of teenage construct, but that first time you want to ask somebody out, right? And we construct all kinds of reasons not to, right? We'll get rejected, yada yada yada. But the most important thing in that moment is to say, what is the brave thing? Mm-hmm. What is the brave thing to do? And the people we want to emulate and the people we admire are the people who have taken the brave path, right? Who have said, I don't care what people think of me. This is what I want to do. I don't care what society thinks of me. This is what I want to create, right? This is who I want to be. So I think that's the first thing, is really learning to ask yourself the question, what is the brave choice? Mm-hmm. The next thing, and this is I just learned from firefighters, and that is to be kind. Someone said to me, they said that most people don't remember the red trucks and the sirens and all that kind of stuff. They remember how kind the firefighters were, right? Mm. And part of that becomes because firefighters have seen suffering and understand suffering. So your response to that is you want to be kind, right? You understand people are going through it. It's like Robin Williams said, be kind because everybody has a story, right? Everybody has a story. And boy, nothing like firefighting teaches you that truth, that everybody out there has a story. Mm-hmm. So being kind as an impulse is probably the most important thing we can do. And I talk about that for every opportunity we have to be brave, there are 100 opportunities every day we have to be kind, right? And I talk about radical kindness, which is every day, finding opportunities to be kind. And there are little things, right? There are little things that infect our society. It's like opening a door for someone. It's like letting somebody cut in front of you in traffic. Mm-hmm. It's not the Indy 500, right?
Right.
It is finding those opportunities daily to be kind. I think the next part of it is don't let your ego get in the way, right? If someone doesn't immediately get down on their knees and thank you for opening the door for them, don't be offended, right? It's not, all we can do is control ourselves.
Absolutely.
All we can do is control how we appear in the world, right? Yeah. And I want to appear and I want to give in kindness every day. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the other really important kind of strategy. The next one is we got to be tough, right? That life requires us to be tough. It is not easy to be human. It is not easy or comfortable to be human. We need to be tough, and we need to teach toughness. It doesn't mean, I think we get confused that being tough means you're not vulnerable, or being tough means you're not compassionate. That's all nonsense. That's all just like kind of either or thinking. We can be tough, and we can be kind, and we can be vulnerable, and we can be compassionate. Mm. But boy, to get through life today or any time there's been humans on the planet, you have to be tough. Yeah. You have to be able to endure. And I often talk about how if you look at your past, your family's past, my family's past, what they've gone through. I mean, just in the last 2 centuries, they went through the First World War and the flu epidemic, the Depression, the Second World War, and so on and so on and so on until today. Yeah. They had to be remarkably tough to get up every day and continue. Yes. And we inherit that. That's in our genes. That's in our stories, and we have to acknowledge that and really understand that it's part of who we are.
Mm. Okay. And that's powerful. And I think it's really powerful to pull in that, tough and vulnerability and kind can all be woven together. They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that is one of the myths of masculinity that we have.
Right.
Is that we have to be Clint Eastwood, right? There is no emotion and you're only strong. Right.
Right.
And so I think that's a really great message, and I think that you're right. And as you've been talking the whole time, I'm thinking, is this COVID-19 pandemic? Could that be that rite of passage for many people?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, I think of this as, I said, the great unsettling. And I think everything stopped, mm-hmm. right? There was nothing to do. There was no work to do. You couldn't go anywhere. And I think it was probably one of the most significant events that we're going to go through in our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. And I'm cautious here because on one hand, everything we lost was there's a lot of inconvenience there.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
There's a lot of inconvenience. I think about, and I think about my daughter working at the hospital at UNM, where they were immersed in this, immersed in death, right? And how it was something they had never seen before. People were actually really suffering, right? And the rest of us were witness to that, right? But I think it's really, to me, an opportunity to always ask ourselves, what's important, right? What's important now in my life? And to have the time to reflect on that and understand a lot of things that we thought were important really are not. And my great hope is that I know a lot of us as individuals hopefully are going to grow a lot from this experience, right? And I would hope that as a society that we take this and grow from it and understand a little bit more about what it means not only to be a human being, but also to be a society, a community of human beings.
Yes, and I think that the thing that could make it a rite of passage for some people is the learning how to be more selfless and learning how and what, like you were saying, what are the priorities, right? Like this is a catastrophe for some, not for, it's an inconvenience for others. Right,
exactly.
And so taking that in and realizing what is it for you, what is it for your community, your family. So, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to us.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'd like to, before we wrap up, so the release date for the book is August 18th?
August 18th.
Okay, great. And this will air after that, so that's good. And so if somebody would like to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
My email, which is fine, is Hersch, HERSCH .Wilson, WILSON, @mac.com.
Okay.
And then I have a website, HerschWilson.com.
Right, yeah.
So those are the two best.
Yeah, and I did check out the website. There's some good videos on there of you speaking as well. That's great. And is there anything coming up after the book releases? Are you going to be doing any virtual events, any speaking engagements?
Right. It's like I have no idea what's going on tomorrow.
Okay.
It's day by day.
Sure. In some ways that's great, and in some ways it's a little unsettling, right? Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Kyle, so much.
Absolutely. And I can't wait for the world to get to see the Firefighter Zen. All right.
Well, thank you so much. Be safe.
You too. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Please take a moment to leave us a good review and subscribe on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. This podcast is for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. We hope you enjoyed today's show. All material copyrighted by the Psychology Talk podcast. Music provided by the band Serenati.